Hello, everyone. In this video, I would like to talk about the Tohoku, the northeast region of Japan, and Fukushima, um, which is also located within the Tohoku region. And I would like to talk about this in relation to my personal story as I was born and raised in the Tohoku region. So you probably have seen a map of Japan, and this is the map. And you probably heard about Tokyo, which is here. The Narita airport that people fly into when they go to Tokyo is also located here. You may probably heard about Kyoto and Osaka. Those are major cities are located in these areas. Kyoto had been the old capital of Japan. Tokyo became the capital of Japan um, when the nation decided to kind of westernize itself in late 19th century. The Tohoku region is here, which is colored in blue. And the Fukushima is located here. It's actually just right above the Kanto region where Tokyo is located. So I would say that Fukushima is one of the closest prefecture that to the metropolitan area. So I grew up in a city called Niigata, which is here. There's a little island there, and then I moved to Yamagata, which is here. And then in my fifth grade, and then moved to Fukushima when I was in the seventh grade, and I went to junior high school and high school there. And after that, I moved to Tokyo, and then later I came here. But anyways, Tohoku means the northeast, right? So I was born and raised in the Tohoku region of Japan and I spent my teens in Fukushima. Although Fukushima is my hometown, my social and emotional connection to Fukushima prior to the nuclear disaster, which happened in 2011, had weakened to the point of becoming almost non existent. Like many other Tohoku-born people, I left my hometown immediately after graduating from high school to seek better opportunities in Tokyo and never returned home until I decided to do research about disaster and education in Fukushima in 2013. So I moved to Tokyo when I was 18 years old to go to college. And this is, I think, Shibuya, one of the um, most populated um, downtown area. It's almost like a Times Square in New York City, but it's a Tokyo version of it. So as soon as I arrived in Tokyo, I raised my local dialect and hid my origin as a way to avoid the negative stereotypes associated with the region. I almost think it was necessary for me to survive in Tokyo area. Um, until I got to Tokyo, I wasn't really aware of negative stereotypes projected on people from Tohoku, but Tohoku um, have been viewed both culturally, socially, politically um, as being a backward place from the perspective of the center. So during the course of this self-driven assimilation, I internalized the colonizers. In other words, people from the center, people from the Tokyo, people who governed the nation. And as I did that, I oppressed myself from inside. I lived without a voice or critical historical consciousness for many years. Despite my scholarly work and teaching on the discursive construction of marginalized people, through the history of modern education in the US and Japan, I had never thought of examining my own history and positionality until I started this research about Fukushima. Instead, I naively researched and wrote about other women in the US. It was the tsunami and that woke me up from the amnesia. The images of towns turned into piles of debris and the sight of people referred to as refugees cramming into temporary evacuation centers brought me right back to Fukushima emotionally. By encountering the work of Tohoku Gaku, the Tohoku study, which gained attention after the disaster, I learned that Tohoku has historically been an internal colony of modern Japan. This knowledge brought about a paradigm change in me because none of my teachers in public schools or even at college told me about this version of history. Throughout my education in public school in Tohoku, my teachers taught me repeatedly that Japan is a homogeneous country consisting of one language and one ethnic group, whose members share a common origin. Learning about a new version of history from the position of Tohoku paralleled a critical deconstruction of the dominant view of the region and tension Tohoku has historically had was the center. First, I realized that the very name given to the region, the Tohoku, northeast, reflects the perspective of Tokyo. Right? It is northeast from the Tokyo. Tokyo is the economic, political, and the cultural center of modern Japan. Seen from the center, Tohoku was historically documented as distant and poor region where uncivilized, immoral, indolent, and unsanitary people who were different from them lived. The Boshin War, it's a civil war that took place in 1868 in the Tohoku region. But this war, in which 31 regions in the Tohoku region fought against the new imperial Japanese government. Um, they unfortunately lost in this war. Um, this war and their defeat reinforced this negative image of Tohoku people and added another stereotype to them that Tohoku people are untrustworthy. In addition to being uncivilized, unsanitary, and immoral. So, as it happened in the US, public school education in 19th century and 20th century contributed to the construction of nation and national identities. So in Japan, throughout the modern time, the central government tried to civilize the Tohoku people. In schools, we were taught to speak in standard Japanese language only and very distorted version of national history, which excluded the perspective of the Tohoku people. The experience overlaps with those of the colonized and the other parts of the world. Another colonial aspect of Tohoku is the central government's policy to develop the region for the purpose of achieving national economic goals rather than to benefit the region itself. Such a policy, which started in the early 20th century, placed Tohoku behind. As a result, Tohoku had to survive by providing center with natural resources, including energy, agricultural products, and cheap labor. After learning this version of the modern history of Japan, I came to realize that my determination to leave Fukushima for a better life, as well as the shame I carried around my language and culture, was rooted in this history. My awareness of the marginalization of Tohoku also opened my eyes to the structure of exploitation manifested in energy policies in contemporary Japan. The fact that there are 14 nuclear power plants in Tohoku region, 10 of which were located in Fukushima, is not coincidental. So this picture shows, it's a little one, but it shows these red dots show where nuclear power plants are. There are power plants which are owned by the Tokyo Electric Power Company, TEPCO, send all the energy they produce directly to Tokyo, with none being used locally. While casting critical gaze to the structure of exploitation in Fukushima is significant, I also realized that we need to critically examine the long, intimate, and dependent relationship between the colonizers and the colonized. In this case, we need to explore local Fukushima people's relationship with the Japanese government and TEPCO. For example, 4 towns in Fukushima chose to have power plants while knowing the risk as nuclear power plants. For many years, these towns enjoyed increased standards of living secured by employment opportunities and subsidies TEPCO and the Japanese government provided. Everything appeared perfect, at least that is how it seemed until the explosion unveiled the structure of exploitation. So this is history of the Tohoku region and Fukushima from my in connection to my personal experiences of um, growing up in Fukushima. So throughout the semester, we'll be talking about the notion of risk society, um, the idea of development in the modern times, and the role education played in to promote economic development in the first stage of modernity. I hope this video provided some general background knowledge about Tohoku and Fukushima.